For this little exercise, we're going to draw a sphere, and we're going to shade it, and then we're going to label it, and then we'll do a value scale. And for me, if you want to, you can use this number 2 pencil. But for me, I'm just going to use this 6B pencil, just because you can see it a little easier up there on the screen. So I'm going to start out with just a circle about the size of a softball. And notice I'm drawing with the side of my pencil. That way I taught you. Your elbow and your shoulder do better circles than your wrist does. So if you're drawing it like this, you're not going to do a good circle. Just a real quick circle. And let's just, for imagine's sake, say that our light source is coming from this direction. You can draw that arrow if you'd like, but knowing that, where is your highlight going to be? Are you going to have a highlight over here? No, what's going to be over here? Your shadow. And because we understand this is round, I mean, we're wise enough to understand that that is round, and therefore you're going to have a highlight over here. And I'm just barely going to put this in. You don't have to draw this in because we're just going to leave that out. But opposite that highlight is going to be a shadow. And you know that light, if this is sitting on something, light is going to bounce around here. So you're going to have some reflected light up in there. So I'm just going to delineate out a shadow area right there. It's going to be a shadowy area. We also know that if this is sitting on something, there's going to be a shadow. And if our light source is over here, you can actually go from your light source, find the edge of your object, and come straight down here and say, okay, that's where my shadow is going to start. I'm going to have this cast shadow. It's going to come clear out here like this. There's my cast shadow. Now, it depends on where your light source is, how far it is away from the sphere and all that stuff. But for us, I'm just going to do this little ellipse. That's my cast shadow. And just like my shadow over here, I know it's going to be dark. I'm just going to shade into it as quick as I can. Now, one of those rules of value is that shadow, in the cast shadow, the shadow is always darker nearer the object. So if I think to myself, okay, that shadow should be darker nearer my object. So the nearer that I go, the darker it goes. I'm going to add a little bit of pressure to my pencil, and as I come out away from the object, it's going to lighten up. And so I'm just not going to press as hard. So as I come up, I just don't press as hard. And so I get a shadow that's darker near my object and kind of moves out. And again, depending on your light source, but my edges should be soft and fuzzy. I shouldn't have a hard line around there. And when you're drawing with the side of your pencil, you don't get that hard edge. Even our sphere doesn't have a hard edge. And in fact, some of that edge I may want to lose completely. Any of this really light area, I may want to just take out that edge almost completely. If not completely, I don't know. I don't think it would be bad to get rid of it. Because you know it's going to be lighter over there, and you know it's going to be darker over here. So then what I'm going to do is that core shadow, I know it's going to be fairly dark in there. I don't know if it's going to be as dark as my cast shadow. So maybe I don't want to press that hard, but I do want it to get fairly dark. So I'm going to do this little core shadow. I want my edges to be soft, so I'm going to just break those edges. And I want that core to be a little darker, right in the center. Because again, we have light that comes this way, and then we have reflected light that comes out this way. And now we can do some blending. So we can take our cotton swab. Hopefully you saved your cotton swabs from Friday, because they're already seasoned. They already have graphite on them. This end does not, so I suppose I could use that end too, but I like that that graphite already been seasoned into my cotton swab, and I can start drawing immediately. I can even come up here and draw some of these light areas. And so I can kind of get rid of some of that graphite off of my cotton swab into that light area. If you don't have an old one, just grab some of that darkness, do your shadow, your darker shadows first, get some graphite on your cotton swab, and then use that up in there. I'm just going to ever so lightly shade this. Even the light area needs a little bit of gray in it. Now where that highlight is, in fact, I got to get rid of that line on my highlight. Where that highlight is, just leave it out. Okay, you know that there's going to be a little bit of gray in there, just leave it out. And if you forget, you can take your kneaded eraser back in there and pull some of that out. But you want at least a little bit of gray in there. For that little spot of light, just leave that little spot of light out. And then you're going to do the same thing. The bottom part here, this highlight can't be that bright, or that reflected light cannot be that bright. So I'm just going to go into it, pull some of that out. And my edge, my shadow, my cast shadow there, got to be soft and fuzzy. Because I'm not really sure where the edge of my light ends and where my shadow starts. So I'm just going to keep going over that until it's the way you like it. Nice and smooth. However it works for you. And once you've blended it, once you've smoothed it out, you may have to go back into it and say, well, you know what? That smoothing process kind of grabbed some of my graphite. Now I need to go back into it and put some more graphite into it. Nothing wrong with that. So I'm going to tip it up because I really want to grind some of that into it. I want it to really get darker. And I'm not pushing real hard with that. As I come out away from my object, my shadow lightens up a little bit, a little darker toward my object. That also helps to define that edge of your object too. And you should have a little bit of reflected light in there. That might be too much. I'm going to go into my core shadow and put a little bit more graphite in there as well. And even into my shadow edge, right on the other side of this core shadow. Might need a little bit more graphite in there. And smooth that out. And you just go as far as you feel like you need to. You could work on this thing until it looked like that was actually sitting right on your page. You could grab that ball and go play with it. And again, depending on the amount of light, that coarse shadow might be a little darker, a little lighter. The cast shadow might be a little darker, a little lighter. I take my kneaded eraser and just clean up anything that I need to, the edges. My highlight, want that to be nice and bright. Any edges of my sphere, I could just clean those up, make them nice and tight. Please don't draw a line around it. We don't want to draw lines around things, because that edge will take care of itself. I mean, you can see that edge without having to draw a line around it. Most things, you don't see that dark edge. You know, there's no line around things. So don't draw it in. And if you go into your, here, let me do this. I'm going to go into my reflected light too much, and I'm going to take that out and think, oh, darn it, I wish I didn't take all that reflected light out. I'm just going to take my kneaded eraser and just touch it. Just touch that edge and bring it out just a little bit. So if you go into it and you took out, or you put too much graphite in there, that kneaded eraser will suck it out. It's like a vacuum. And you can increase the dynamics of that coarse shadow. Add just a little bit of darkness to it. That makes it that much better. Last but not least, somewhere in there, I want to do another little ellipse. This one you could do a little line around if you want. I'm going to do a little double ellipse like this. I'm going to just shade that as dark as my pencil will go right from the start. I'm going to add some pressure to it. I want it to go very dark. That is as dark as my pencil will go. And I can even take some of this and shade, bring some of that up. Shade a little bit of the sides there. So what does that look like? That's what that is a hole. And I'm going to call it a hole. Now, if you were to Google this, and you were to Google shading a sphere, or parts of a sphere or whatever, you'll get all this stuff here, but you won't get this. This is a Mr. Lowe edition. As I was drawing, there are parts that I think, gosh, that's darker than what I can see over here. That's a hole. So I've added this value to our values of our sphere. That's a hole. And sometimes you'll see that when you're drawing the human face, you have the pupil of the eye is a hole. It's a hole right through your eye, into the back of your eye. Yes, there is a lens over it, but technically it's a hole. It's black. It's very dark. Or under the ears sometimes, especially if you've got long hair, you'll get a hole. Or up into the nostril, or in the ear, or someplace. There's little areas of darkness like this. So let's go ahead and label this sphere. What do we call that little lightest area? Okay, the lightest area is the highlight. It's the reflection of the light itself on your object. So it's pure light. Light hits that and you'll see a little shine. Okay, that's our highlight. Then, as that light kind of dissipates around our sphere, we're just going to call that stuff light. Some people call it the light side, shadow side, that kind of a thing. But we're just going to call it light. Then as that light dissipates and goes around the object, there's an edge, and you're not really sure where it starts and stops. We're just going to call that the shadow edge. And depending on your light source, this could be quite large, this shadow edge area. But it's just where the light fades into the shadow. Then you have this really dark area right there. We're going to call that the core shadow, or the shadow core. It's that dark area. Think apple core. It's the center. Then we have this light area that's down in there. We're going to call that reflected light. And then, of course, you've got your cast shadow. I like the number 7. There are 7 elements of art, 7 principles of art, and now there are 7 values, including the whole. And the more you understand these values, the better your objects are going to be when you draw them. And the more you understand the contrast, the differences between the darks and lights, the better your objects are going to be when you draw them. Okay, last but not least, a little rectangle, about 3/4 of an inch or so. It doesn't have to be too big, wide. We need 9 spaces in there. So I'm just going to put in 8 little lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That should give me 9 sections. And you can go left to right or right to left, it does not matter. But one of these needs to be the hole. And so I'll put the hole over here, H-O-L-E. That's my hole. And so I'm going to take that as dark as my 6B pencil will go. I'm going to add as much graphite as it will take. You know, it'll get to a certain point where you just cannot put more graphite on there. It gets saturated. But that's as dark as my graphite will go. So then we know that this part up here, the highlight, is white. You don't want to put anything in that one. But all these in between need some gray. And we're going to go from the darkest hole up to our lightest highlight. And so I know that there's graphite in there. I might as well cover the whole thing with graphite, at least in that bottom section. And I know that these have graphite in them too, but they're going to be very, very, very light. And I can get those with my cotton swab, just like I did with my sphere. And so then, I'm just going to add some darkness to these. I'm not pressing as hard as I did with the hole. This one needs to go fairly dark. I've got to be able to see a change from one to the other. And then the next one, I've got to see a change there too. I'm going to go just a little bit lighter, a little bit lighter, a little lighter, a little lighter. And in order to help facilitate that, I could use my cotton swab and come in here and just very, 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 very lightly put in some gray. Very light. So that this one has just a little bit of gray. And then I'm going to add a little bit more pressure, maybe a little more graphite if I can turn my cotton swab to get that. Just a little bit more. And then this one, I've already put graphite in it, so as I smear it, it should already go darker because it's covering up the white of the paper. And you want to be able to see a change. As I grade this, I'm going to grade it on how I can see the changes from your light to your dark. So you've got a value scale there from very dark to very light. You should be able to see a change in each one of those. Now, I do want to tell you this. I truly believe that if you can draw this with all these values, you can draw anything. Anything. The human face is made up of a whole bunch of spheres. The nose, the chin, the ears. They're all spheres, but a little more complex. But you're still going to have reflected light. You're going to have a shadow core. You're going to have your light side, your shadow edge. Oftentimes you'll see a highlight there. Not always, but sometimes. And every now and then you might find a little bit of a hole in there, something very, very dark. Okay?